Awesome. Well, welcome to another episode of Advertising Alpha. Today we have Gabrielle Pittman, who directs client strategy for her agency, eBusiness Pros, and is proud to represent Klaviyo as a community champion since 2023. In addition to guiding brands with multi-channel retention marketing strategies, Gabrielle advises e-commerce software companies and teaches workshops. Gabrielle, super pumped to have you. I know you have such a unique perspective on D2C email strategy, and you've spoken on a lot of panels, teaching workshops, and I think your experience is super valuable and really pumped to have you on. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So the first question I have for you is, what do you kind of see as the biggest trend in 2025 for email campaign strategy?
Well, part of how a brand decides which campaigns to send to a brand and how often to send those campaigns is their content and promotions. But another important factor is deliverability. And last year, Yahoo and Google released some pretty big changes in how a sender's reputation is determined. And so now, a year later, we're starting to see more important ramifications from that, which means the engagement of your list with every email that you send carries more and more weight. And so making sure that you're sending content that's interesting and relevant. Sometimes it needs to be educational about your products. Sometimes it's more storytelling about maybe there's a particular aspirational lifestyle that people choose to be part of, and your products are a conduit to that. So putting your products in that context. For example, like if you have a movie night, how do you make that better by using someone's product in a certain way to just overall enhance the experience? But also, of course, sales are important. How do you keep revenue high and send the right offer to the right people? So I think for any brand wanting to be successful in 2025, it's really dialing in, okay, what are those buckets and how often are you sending each type of content to which groups of people?
Awesome. And I'm not that well versed on the email side of things. And I think one thing when I heard about this update, I saw all this stuff on LinkedIn. It's like email is dead. Or whoever has like deliverability scores of X, Y, and Z, you're not gonna be able to send anymore. It's like, hey, all these companies are going to get kicked off of all these different types of platforms. Could you quickly explain what was the kind of technical change that like Google rolled out and really what that meant? And then you spoke to as well as like this kind of content strategy and how that allows for better deliverability, better open rates, and better kind of score for any brand. But what does that like truly mean in kind of basic terms? And like, what was that change? And then like, how are you kind of addressing this new landscape with this strategy that you described?
For sure. So if this gets a little too technical, my apologies in advance. It's a little bit getting in the weeds here, but the basic answer is a brand needs to have a verified sending name and domain at the foundation of it. And so the email address that you're sending from needs to match your website. And you'd be shocked how many brands, February of 2024, that was really a disruptive change for them. That was the first step. And then after that, the ratio of emails that are marked as spam, or the ratio of people who unsubscribe compared to the people who are clicking and ordering or sending a reply to an email that you send. It's that balance of positive and negative engagements that really all factor up to your deliverability score. So, people have been saying email's dead since before I was like an adult and a marketer at all. And I think we've seen clear data to prove that that is not true. But when it comes to promotions and how often you're sending those, how often you're using words like for a limited time only, the sale ends tonight, things that get on that edge of being spammy language, Google and Yahoo and other email providers are getting more and more sensitive to that. Because as a consumer, if your inbox is flooded with emails, from a user experience perspective, that's not really fun to see. It's not relevant to you most of the time. It's not really matching where you're at in your buying journey often. And so that's part of where the content that you're sending really becomes the underutilized weapon for a lot of brands. Because if you're sending a sale every week or hey, buy this product with zero context around why the product is actually useful to someone, it's no surprise your engagement or revenue may be suffering.
Got it. Awesome. So I guess if we can double click into that content strategy, there's like a frequency strategy, right? Like how many sends you're doing. And I'm sure there's part of that, there's like a segmentation piece of it. But then also too, there are like specific, there are promotions. It's like, how often do you send promotions in a given time frame? And then it's, what are you sending that's related to some seasonal trend or seasonal messaging? how does that all work? Like what's, maybe you could give us like kind of a very basic top level breakdown of like what this kind of email content strategy looks like. And maybe let's say any given quarter, any given month.
Absolutely. Well, there's definitely seasonal patterns and it depends on where you're at in the world. So that's a key piece, but also sometimes brands like Black Friday is a really big element of e-commerce, but there are other brands, especially in the home decor space, where like Memorial Day tends to actually be a bigger impact promotional period. So to some extent, you just need to be willing to test things and find out what your data for your brand's customers is really telling you. But when it comes to evergreen content that's not seasonal, that's where leveraging flows or automated sequences of messages can become like an exponential kind of secret weapon to have, because then you can set up the segmentation and have the content prepared so that if you know someone's in a particular buying stage or they're coming from a particular opt-in funnel source, like say you have a lead magnet about how to get better feng shui in your home by having rugs in a certain size on the floor and your home decor brand selling rugs. You could funnel them through a whole journey of messages that will just be running on repeat in the background always. And then your campaigns can take more of that seasonal approach. So that's a pretty basic level of how you would do the segmenting.
Okay, awesome. And then is there any kind of recommendation on sending frequency? And I know this depends on, your segments of audiences, but the biggest thing I've seen is brands obviously want to send a lot less. At least from what I've heard and seen, the data says it's better to send more. What's the kind of recommendation there?
I think there's a lot of conflicting information that probably makes it confusing for a brand that's trying to find what the right balance is for their audience. So at the end of the day, your list size really does matter a lot, because if you only have 2,000 brands or 2,000 people in your audience, or you have 10,000 people or 2 million, the ratio of people who are going to be engaged at different levels shifts dramatically. And so how often you can send an email to everyone as compared to an email to people who have been shopping for women's clothing and it's summer and you have a sale coming soon just for like SMS subscribers, you guys send them an exclusive offer that no one else sees publicly. Those are the kinds of things that impact your frequency. So at a baseline, it's important to pull an analogy from my music days. Like the bass drum in a song should be your campaigns. There should be a consistent cadence that just, is always going to be happening, because it keeps your deliverability healthy. It keeps your engagement at like a good baseline. And then aside from that, it's a matter of what tolerance does your audience have for frequent contact. And the more often you're sending something, the more personalized and relevant it should be. And that's where a lot of brands get stuck, because I'm the first to admit it. There's a pressure for sales, whether you're on agency side or brand side. And so if you're like, oh, well, the inbox is really noisy, let's just send more so that we can break through the inbox. And then your deliverability tags, and then everyone else is also sending more in the inbox. And then people are like, oh my God, I hate email marketing because my Gmail is always just filled with people spamming me, trying to get me to buy. And it's like, wow, no wonder we have such a bad rep in the email space. So I think
So
at a baseline, it's just like, who's engaging, double click on them, but also make sure you're careful of how often you're asking them to buy in relation to just giving them something valuable in return.
got it. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's a crazy vicious cycle, I guess, with email. Um, it's like, hey, everyone else is sending more. We should send more too. And everyone else are using these ridiculous kind of subject lines. Like, we're going to do it too to break through. And it just, that kind of race to the bottom. It's really tough. So
There
it
is a
makes
place
sense.
for an unhinged subject line, though. It
Yeah.
can be done well, and you can get good results from it if your audience is open to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, you kind of spoke to this already, but I was wondering if you have any kind of unique insights to share around how you approach audience segmentation. Anything to it. Maybe you want to walk us through kind of a basic framework to understand it, and then how to, any kind of unique advantages that you've kind of learned along the way of what people should really be thinking about when they're approaching, segmenting their email list.
Absolutely. Segmenting is one of the things that I actually get teased by my team for nerding out over maybe a little bit too much. But the reality is these are people, and the more you can understand them better, the more you can something that's really interesting. So there's behavioral segmenting, there's demographic segmenting, and then there are things on top of that, like maybe it's a combination of both. And so in some cases, for a brand that's just trying to understand how to improve their deliverability score, they're going to go really deep on engagement segmenting. So behavior of opening, clicking, maybe they're going to add some awareness of how often someone's purchased, if they're visiting your site. These are all data points you can leverage. But then where things get really interesting is when you start adding integrations to my preferred email tool is Klaviyo. And so there you can integrate Meta, you can integrate TikTok EM, you can add your reviews tool, your social media intelligence of brand ambassadors that you have and how they're referring people to your brand. All these things help you segment by like loyalists and your repeat customers who maybe don't engage with email so often, but are telling their friends about you every chance they get. And so one thing that's difficult for brands to scale is to maintain that level of personalization every week, every month with an email that they're creating for a campaign. So that's where flows can become a really useful tool to say, okay, we have this group of people, we want to tell them this journey, and we're going to send them these emails, these SMS messages telling this story about maybe you're someone who had gotten introduced to a brand, but you decided after 30 days, you're not sure about buying from them, you need a little extra nudge. That's something we call a prospect nurturing funnel, for example. So for me, the fun thing is designing those journeys around that group of people because it's like a way to help a team scale something that otherwise they couldn't do on their own on demand every week.
Yeah, makes sense. I used to did a lot of nonprofit fundraising, and by that I was some political fundraising. And the political fundraising emails were all manual. There's no segment, there's no automation there. And it was just people would just like, they would mock up the emails and send them just on repeat. And there's none of that going on. And it was an interesting thing when I moved over to D2C ecom and started like seeing tools like Klaviyo where it's like, oh, wow, it's like so much leverage in just building out this automation. You can go set up tons of different types of automation and, it's just not nearly as much work. It just kind of blew my mind. And I think to your point too, on the personalization side, that's where it really becomes valuable because if someone sees like same type of email over and over again, or if it's just very clear that it's just this mass sent email and there's nothing with that kind of recognizes that person as a customer or their customer activity, obviously it kind of alienates the customer from the brand. So it just seems like there's a ton of value in that.
Yeah. And to borrow a phrase from the ad side, you start to see incremental gains really
Yeah.
with these automations because they're just running in the background. So the biggest hurdle to get over is creating it in the first place. And a lot of brands actually get intimidated by that. They're like, oh my God, we have so many emails to create. And so
Yeah.
if you start just getting efficient about, okay, to borrow even more from the ad side, you test a campaign for your creative, you find that it's a winner in one way or another. And then you go, okay, how do we make this an evergreen version, throw it into a flow, launch it. The revenue builds up month over month as more people enter that. It's just almost a no-brainer once you get over the initial overwhelm of, okay, how are we going to make this in the first place?
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. Do you have like a recommended process for a brand to go in and start to start segmenting their list? Because I think I've ran into a couple instances where brands just had the whole list, like a MailChimp, and they're like, yeah, we're just sending to this whole entire list the same emails. And I'm like, wow, like, pretty sure you could be a little more sophisticated. But what's your process, especially like maybe it's say you mostly work in Klaviyo, but like, do you have a way of looking at like kind of the recency, frequency, like monetary value element? And do you have like a recommended process for starting to segment out that list for brands?
Absolutely. It does depend on what platform you use. You have different abilities to segment more or less precisely based on that. Like one thing where MailChimp kind of falls short is they limit your segmenting to a specific list. So unless they're in that list, you can't cross-reference, which is like the bane of my existence every time I go audit a MailChimp account. But at a base level, you should understand how many people on your list have never opened an email ever. It's usually 15 to 30%, depending on the brand. And then people who've opened your emails, clicked in some kind of action in the last 30 days, that's your hottest audience. And there are sub-segments of that, but if you want the baseline to start, that's a good understanding to have. Okay, where do these two groups of people lie? And then when it comes to understanding where people are in the buying journey, them can sometimes be intimidating depending on the size of the brand. And so if you start at a level of, okay, who are our prospects and who are the most likely to buy among those prospects because they've given a variety of shopping signals like viewing a product, adding a cart, whatever. And then one thing that my agency pays special attention to is the ratio of repeat customers. So once you get someone from that prospect stage to their first order, how long does it take for them to become a repeat customer with their second order? And then after that, the third order. And what's interesting is a lot of brands, it's this very common pattern where they could be a $50 million a year revenue e-commerce business. They could be doing more than that. They could be doing less. But the common thread is that third order to get past that is a really difficult milestone for an e-commerce brand to reach. So to optimize around how do you build the VIP level above that is a very interesting puzzle that I personally like to work on.
And you said that's a third order?
The third order.
Yeah.
For some reason, that's the line.
Third time's a charm.
It's either the charm or it's what breaks you.
Yeah. But I've seen that. I've heard that from some brands that we worked with where it's just like, yeah, we just need that third purchase and then we're good. LTV shoots way up, obviously, because that person then sticks around for a while. But that's something that we've tried to kind of build lookalikes from and really focus on like, hey, what type of creative, what products, what campaigns were we running that drove these people eventually became strong LTV customers and made that third purchase. Awesome. Well, last question for you. What do you think the biggest misconception is around email marketing for direct-to-consumer brands?
This may get me some heat, but I would say you actually just send less emails.
Send less emails.
Yeah, because at some point, the impressions of being seen in the inbox are useful. But then there's a diminishing return of you've sent so many emails, you're just going to piss someone off and they're going to hit unsubscribe. And then it's just a net loss. So dancing that to find the right balance and sending just enough to stay in their inbox, in their frame of reference, but not so many that you frustrate them and make them feel like you're just one more brand spamming their mail. That is the biggest misconception. Because if you're going to send more, you have to be more targeted. There's no way around it. Otherwise, it's just more batch and blast like it's 2005, and e-commerce does not need more of that.
Yeah. I mean, from my understanding, it's like, yeah, to your point, you just find where the line is, and you got to go up to the line, and then you're like, okay, unsubs are shooting up. Okay, that's where we are, and then you just kind of you have to stick around there.
Sometimes it's just switching channels. Like maybe they're not an email person; they prefer SMS or they prefer direct mail. Some of the brands I'm a most loyal shopper to, I never want to receive their email personally, but I like their postcards. I like their SMS messages. I will still buy from them. So I think the more data you have to work with to identify people's affinity for a channel is going to be another really important lever in the coming years.
Yep, totally makes sense. That's all the questions I have for you. I guess just with the last couple minutes, do you have anything you want to say about eBusiness Pros or what you guys are working on, what types of clients you're looking for?
Yeah, so eBusiness Pros is a lifecycle marketing agency. Fun fact, my father actually started it about 20 years ago. Back in the day, he was trying to build a software platform not very far away from Klaviyo and Shopify mixed together. And he bit off more than he could chew. At some point, it didn't work out, but he's stayed in the e-commerce space and built up a deep expertise in the industry. And so then I also ended up getting into e-commerce, and it's become this really interesting journey where we work with brands that, they run the CPG side, the more heirloom, like boutique luxury brand side. There's also brands that are more just kind of like standard e-commerce businesses where they're looking for that return customer and they're looking to have profit every quarter. And so we've found that really dialing in on the customer's experience and the retention and also making sure that our clients have a positive ROI on what they're spending with us and their retention channels, whether it's SMS, direct mail, or email. We've found that having that particular expertise, being in that focused niche is what helps us make sure that clients do really well every year, every month. And we tend to have pretty good client retention. So I'd say we're on the right track.
Awesome. Well, makes sense because you guys obviously know what you're doing. It's been great working with you on the brands that we worked on together. So, well, thanks for joining. I thought this was super informative, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Hal. It's been great working with you too, and I'm glad we got to be a little nerdy about email for a second.
Yeah, awesome.